Daryl, thank you. Mr. President, thank you for the invitation and all the guests here. You know, when you give these talks, we call them talks in the academy, not speeches, all right? So you want people to know who you are. In the end, you know, I've been here 6 months. I haven't met many of you. Who is this guy, right? And so I'm going to speak a little bit from the heart and then a little bit from the text, which was written from the heart. From the heart. I get asked 2 questions all the time. One of them has disappeared. For about 2 months, the only question anybody asked me was who the football coach was going to be. You know, even my father-in-law asked me. He says, what's it like to be president of LSU? And I said, you know, I'm talking about scholarship first and all this. And he looks at me, and this man's a long-time educator. He looks at me, man, I'm not talking to you about that. I'm asking you who the football coach is going to be. So it's something. Now, the next question that we have a coach has been, don't you feel bad taking that guy from Notre Dame? Now, I'm going to take you on a journey with me. And the year is 1982. I finished my undergraduate degree, and I moved to Dallas, Texas. And I have a job in the telecommunications corridor as a financial analyst. Everything's going right for me. Until they had a slowdown. And like telecom, you know how that industry works. Up and down. Up and down. And unfortunately, I hadn't started. And so they told me, Mr. Tate, you know, you're going to get a job eventually. You have to wait for the uptick. Meanwhile, my father says to me, hey, man, you need a job. And I said, you know, Daddy, I mean, all right. He says, why don't you work in education? I said, I have no interest in working in education. My grandmother was a first grade teacher. I still get shivers every time I see flashcards. All right? My father at the time was working in adult education. And I just said, he's just trying to clone me. You just want me to be like you know, that kind of thing. He says, no, man, you eat a lot. You need a job. So he said, you tutored calculus in undergrad, did you not? And I said, I did. He says, well, you know, they're hiring people in the Dallas Independent School District all the time to teach math. I said, Daddy, I don't have a teaching certificate. I don't know anything about that. Now, I did tutor. I was an undergraduate TA. So he brought all of that up. In other words, I had to go apply for the job in the DISD. And I'm telling you this story for a reason because it changed my life. So I go and get this job in the School of Mayors, where all the mayors of Dallas, for about at least a 50-year run, had attended school, Woodrow Wilson High School. And when I interviewed with the principal, he says, you know, you played sports, didn't you? I said, yes, sir, I did. He says, well, we need a coach. So I said, a coach? Well, I came here to teach math, but he said, you know, they pay you a little more, and I remember what my father said. I do eat a lot. So I said, I'll coach. He says, well, it's going to be girls basketball and track. I said, man, girls basketball and track? I don't know anything about coaching girls. And he said, you will when you get done. So that, number one, was the best thing that ever happened to me in my professional life. Because I had to learn how to lead a group that I really culturally, I didn't fully understand in a sporting environment. But that's enough for another day. But what happens in Texas is extremely important because I signed up to coach girls track and basketball, and basketball season, as you know, starts later in the semester. In Texas, everyone has to be involved with football. I don't care if you're carrying the water. You're going to be out there helping the football team. And I was told that you got to get out here and work. So I go out to the practice field, and I'm watching. And there's a guy out there, and I mean, he can go. Now, I knew I could, back then I could go. I was like, I know I can go. But I'm looking at him like, oh, no, this is different. This is different, right? But I didn't know who he was. I talked to my buddy. I said, man, who is that kid? He said, that's Tim Brown. I said, Tim Brown? Man, you got to be kidding me. Okay. So we watched the year go by, and I've never seen anything like this. He scores a touchdown every way possible. Meanwhile, my father says, you coaching, I'm going to come out and see the guys. So we're out there, and he's watching. Now, Tim is going like this in the recruiting circle. I'm getting to the point. Y'all be patient. He's going like this. First it's SMU. Then it's TCU. Then it's the University of Texas. Then it's Oklahoma. Now they got my attention now. I'm like, this boy's getting recruited by OU. This is insane. So we're almost the same age. I'm only 21 and he's 18. So he's hanging out with me like we're buddies. Hanging out at our house over the weekend. My father's coming over talking to him. Finally, he gets to a point where school comes wearing a little bit of gold and a lot of blue. And it's getting serious now. So we're huddled up in my father's house with Tim, my coaching buddy. And my father says something that I will never forget. He said to Tim, yeah, I like OU. They do a nice job in football. Texas, they're all right. TCU and SMU, you know, if you just want to get paid, you know, that's where you go. He said, the only school I really see that you should go to is Notre Dame. He said, you could win the Heisman and be an academic All-American and a first-team All-American. Everything is there for you to do. All right. In essence, what my father was saying, scholarship first. You hear me? Not football. Now, I'm an impressionable young man. I'm listening. This is a real deal situation. Now, you all know how the story played out. Tim Brown ends up going to Notre Dame, and he wins the Heisman Trophy, and he excelled academically, and actually, his recruiting and several others led to a catalytic effect at Notre Dame, and in subsequent years, Lou Holtz won the national championship. Now, as I was flying up to South Bend to pick up our coach, something came over me. And actually, it's very scriptural. There are 66 scriptures in the Bible that allude to sowing and reaping. One of them says, sow with a view of righteousness, or to righteousness, and reap in accordance with kindness. And I was thinking about that time with Tim Brown, where we took a view of doing what was right. And for all of you all who think I'm feeling guilty about going to Notre Dame to get that coach, I just believe it was sowing and reaping. It was my time. It was my time. All right? You hear me? So I just had to get that off my chest. All right? Now, I said I was going to come talk to you about parallel play. And I will. Some of you actually know what parallel play is. You have seen it if you've been around children, especially if they're 2 or 3 years old. This concept was developed in the academy by a woman, a professor named Mildred Parton. And in 1933, she published The Stages of Child Development. And in that development, the first stage, we all recognize that children observe one another, but they don't engage. And then they're willing to sit next to one another in parallel play, enjoying one another's company, but not engaging. And then in the third stage, as they mature, they begin to play with one another, and actually they get to a point of sharing, and they can get to a place, if they're fully mature, to collective engagement. These are the stages that children go through. I submit to you today that these are the exact stages that institutions experience, including higher education. You see, LSU is a gem. It's an outstanding institution. And it's quite possible for those of you who are in the business sector to observe it just like one of those dimensions, the first stage. We just look at LSU, do whatever it does. And then some of you are in the second stage, in parallel play. We can play close to LSU, like I can go to a football game. I can go watch that outstanding baseball team. I sure like Kim Mulkey. I'm going to go watch the women's basketball team. You are engaged in parallel play. There is no cooperation. There is no value added for the engagement. It's strictly the second stage of child development. Now, what I would like to propose to you is that if the state of Louisiana is to attain the highest and optimal level for its people, that we must move beyond the stage of parallel play. And it's important for us to engage in cooperative partnerships that advance an agenda that allows for our people here to flourish. It is that simple to me. I am confident in what the people at LSU can do with respect to research. Let me say this. This institution has two primary purposes. The first is to preserve our history and culture. The second is to protect and secure our future. Typically, the way you think about this is that the humanities are in the business of preserving our future. And the social sciences and engineering and the sciences are in the business of protecting our future. Now, I will say, and I'll say it to you in this way, and I'm going to be biblical. Almost all of the academic world is built on the principle of who is my neighbor. Now you might say, this guy's crazy. It's nowhere in the world. Half those people are atheists, right? You know, I mean, that's what you read in the newspaper. Here's the deal. Who is my neighbor? A neighbor is just somebody who's close by. And my colleagues in psychology, they describe how our neighbors think. And my colleagues in sociology describe the structural elements of what happens with our neighbors. And my colleagues in biology simply describe what's happening in our bodies and how our bodies are reacting to the world around them. And you pick any ology you want to, and I guarantee you they're describing some human element. Now, the who is my neighbor question is a big question. The universities do a wonderful job of describing their neighbors. We're excellent at it. But unfortunately, to move to the step of actually answering the theological question, because the theological question requires you to go beyond description. The theological question says, not only do you know about your neighbor, but you act to help them and and work with them on their behalf. You do everything you can to make sure that your neighbor is taken care of. Now, here we are in a university. We're cranking out truth, discovery, and the like. And we do it very well. We describe our neighbors well. But if it's operating in parallel play and not coupled with commercialization, not coupled with business enterprise, not coupled with sound government policy, not coupled with people who really care and want to engage with us in a philanthropic way, then it is not as robust, and ultimately we're only describing and not dealing with the theological question of who is my neighbor and how can I make a difference for them. And what I submit to you here is because I saw your principles up there. I've been to some of these Rotaries before. You're supposed to be in the business of helping. That's part of your deal. And I just think there's some wonderful opportunities for us to engage. Now, my remarks today are supposed to focus on aspirations. I aspire and envision collective action by all of us to serve the great state of Louisiana and its people. LSU tradition informs the articulation of these aspirations. Yet, I want you to understand a little bit more about what I value. So I'm going to take you to a medieval time, because universities are medieval artifacts. You ought to know that, did you? They didn't just start with these Roman Colosseums called football. They literally are medieval artifacts. And sometime in the early 1500s, one of the first gifts endowing a professorship, which, by the way, if you all want to endow one, we'll gladly take your money, was awarded to the advancement of the theological mission of Cambridge University. It was named for Lady Margaret. The chair was awarded to John Fisher. He was a scholar. Imagine a medieval version of LSU's esteemed boy professors and other endowed professors on our campus. Fisher held many, many important roles, including he was Bishop of Rochester, England, Chancellor of Cambridge. I thought I had a hard job. In his leadership of Cambridge, Fisher placed a great value on classical education. He was definitely about grasping hold of the culture and making sure the heritage was taken care of. And Greek and Latin, Hebrew were added to the curriculum. And interestingly, nearly 300 years later, LSU, or what was then known as the Louisiana State Seminary of Learning and Military Academy, that classical approach to education served as the foundational curriculum approach for the early instantiations of LSU students. Hoffman's history of LSU indicates that this approach to education aligned with the educational model at Thomas Jefferson's University of Virginia. Moreover, the approach was actually contested, as many supporters of the seminary preferred the scientific, military, and literacy approach of VMI, Virginia Military Institute. I know you're not surprised that there were contested matters in higher education. Now, Fisher's life reflected how contested matters require values and principles of engagement for those living in a university community embedded in a larger public sphere. Fisher was a true public intellectual in that he served as a tutor and advisor, and here it comes, to King Henry VIII. It's a bad job, folks. Bad job. You think the LSU presidency is hard business. It's tough stuff here. In Henry VIII's History with Women, I think that's a Title IX problem. I know, I'm not trying to be funny, but that's a problem. Matters of fertility and his pursuit of divorce represented major ethical breaches and moral failures in light of the accepted value system associated with the prevailing system of accountability. John Fisher, the Lady Margaret professor, took a public stand against the king's effort to declare his marriage to Queen Catherine null and void. His defense of Catherine came with a price. Fisher's public position, based on canon, principle, ethics, and moral conviction, contributed to and ultimately cost the first holder of the Lady Margaret professorship at Cambridge his head. He was executed by the king, his mentee, his former student. The tale informs three values that warrant highlighting and represent what I'm trying to get done with my colleagues at LSU in a university context. Seek the truth, demonstrate empathy, and operate with courage. Now, I'm going to say a couple things to you as presuppositions to where I think we ought to go at LSU. Presupposition number one, and I can have a whole speech on it. This state is special, but we also have a significant poverty problem. And it's nearly impossible to think about public policy without keeping that in mind And universities are nothing but artifacts of public policy. Presupposition number one, that has to be dealt with. Presupposition number two, I compete directly for students, Texas and Florida. People always talk about Alabama. I'm not worried about Alabama. Texas and Florida. Their tax policy is a lot better than ours. Facts. It's a problem. Has to be dealt with. Now, that said, imagine we dealt with those. Then I would say to you that LSU should focus on 5 areas that I'm calling a pentagon to protect our future, to secure our future. And this pentagon really is something that I think if we double down on and we're disciplined about, we will be special. Let me begin first with what should be obvious to all. And I actually experienced it this year for the first time in my life, a hurricane. I'm from Chicago, we had tornadoes. We don't do this. This thing is pretty serious, isn't it? And it's having huge implications for us. And it's really having detrimental effects on our coast. And so it's imperative that one aspect of this Pentagon is that we deal with coastal science. Now, our dean is up here, and he thinks I'm kowtowing to him now. That's not the case. Now, he knows, and we've been talking about it. The reality is, our physical well-being is linked to our coastal protection. Now, my concern, because LSU has 200 plus researchers working in coastal science. It's amazing. But if it stays that way, and they just generate paper after paper after paper, what do we call that? Parallel play. You see, it's imperative that we have that linkage between what we're learning and what's being applied actually in the state. Moreover, I think we should aspire to be the best coastal science program in the world, not in the United States, in the world. We have sufficient talent, leadership, and a real need. So we need a ship, don't we? Yeah, we need a ship. You get us a ship, we'll be the #1 coastal program in the United States and in the world. We'll be fighting against everybody. Wouldn't you agree, Dean? You got to say yes now. Right now, it's a basic test.
We've been there, yeah.
We've been there. And there are other things we need to enhance our physical infrastructure on. And it's extremely important that you understand that we're not going to stand pat in this area. We're going to keep pushing. The other area or other side of the Pentagon that I think is extremely important is that we must understand our history. And LSU is linked to a military history, a ROTC history. But the modern military is really about cyber. Every one of us is at risk. This state is at risk. There are criminals and government entities that would exploit any weakness we have right now. We need to have a cyber system in the state of Louisiana of learning and research that is second to none. I am committed as president of LSU to create a cyber corridor within LSU, and I want to say this further. I will not operate in parallel play. I know that other systems are interested in cyber. We will be complementary in what we do. In other words, we won't replicate what happens at Louisiana Tech or Lafayette. We'll do other things and communicate with them so that we're all on the same page, so that the state of Louisiana is known as the place to come to be educated in this, and you might want to stay and build your business here, assuming we get our tax policy right. It's all connected. We have the 5th highest cancer disparities in the United States of America. LSU has an amazing set of assets related to cancer. From our vet school, where we have animal models, to the basic science that happens in our med schools and on the Baton Rouge campus, to the clinical trials that are happening in our med school and in the Baton Rouge campus, to the population science that's happening on the Baton Rouge campus and in our 2 medical centers, to the prevention work. Today, I learned that one of our former colleagues was listed as having a top 50 paper in the history of cancer research. Now, I want to emphasize, I said former colleague. I love the fact that he did the work at LSU. But one of our unique challenges is once we invest in people, we've got to be able to keep them. I don't ever want to say somebody has a top 25 paper or top 50 paper in X or Y, and now they're working at some other institution. We've got to find a way to invest in our faculty. Agriculture. Wow. Well, that's our mission. Its core. In the 1920s, LSU colleagues went and looked at the best ag schools in the United States, and they came back from Tennessee and Wisconsin and Kentucky and other places, and took what they learned, and they said they were going to apply it at LSU. And the key was the ag school was integrated into the main campus and doing great research. If you look at the design today, it's as if that report never existed. We must knit our assets together and move beyond parallel play and make sure that our ag school and its extension is deeply wedded into this state. And moreover, we must commit to the best biotechnology possible to get us to precision agriculture, which is a big informatics area and robotics area that we've just got to double down on. I think the farmers and the people engaged in this kind of work in the state of Louisiana deserve the very best technology, not something that would have happened in the 1970s or 80s, period. Did I get to my 5 yet? Oh, how could I forget? Now, we are the most energy dependent state in our country. Energy is important. It's a big part of our history. I submit to you that my colleagues at LSU need to be in partnership on carbon capture research with business and making sure we can commercialize the very best research possible in order for us to continue to flourish in our economy, but also secure our climate, which are deeply related to agriculture as well as the coast. These are interdependencies that we must take advantage of, all of our skill sets, and work together. Now, I've given you the Pentagon, and I know I'm running out of time, but it is Christmas time, and I have to offer my favorite movie. I don't know what your favorite movie is, but my favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life. And this is crazy, right? There's George Bailey. He's a decent man. He reminds me of, the kind of guy you would want to just hang out with. But things go bad for him, right? And he loses a lot of money, and folk like you are coming for him. It was probably the Rotary Club in that. They're coming for him, right? Bankers and all kind of folks, police. They don't get this guy, and he's a good guy. So he just says, I don't want to be alive anymore. End it all for me. And he has an amazing thing happen, a miracle. He gets to see the world without him being there. That's something, isn't it? You ought to do that exercise one day, but that's another story. George Bailey, for me, is an opportunity to ask you a question. What would it look like if the world never had universities? Just didn't exist. There's no Bill Tate talking to you right now. All this stuff's gone, right? There would be no seatbelts. GPS is not existing. There's no Google. There's no TV. There's no internet. No computers, no wind tunnels, no Richter scale, no rocket fuel, no oil refineries. Woo! No solar power, no pH meter, no insulin, no chemotherapy drugs, no Allegra, no polio vaccine, no flu shots. Go get it, please. No bone marrow transplants, no pacemakers, no CT scans, no MRI scanners, no vitamin D fortification. You know, this year LSU, just the Baton Rouge campus alone, garnered $166 million in research contracts in areas just like the ones I described. Biomedical research, counterterrorism, machine learning, cancer research, resiliency to climate-induced hazards, mental health services, education, sustainability of coastal communities, shorelines, matters dealing with poverty. And every dollar they brought in is a 3-to-1 economic benefit for the state. So that means this year it's almost $500 million of economic impact just on the research dollars alone. That's called sowing and reaping. Now, a big question is, will it operate in parallel play? In totality, LSU's 8 campuses educate the majority of the state's doctors, teachers, lawyers, veterinarians, and other professionals to the tune of $5.1 billion of economic impact in the last estimate. The lifetime earnings of LSU graduates is close to $8.6 billion. So when people start saying things about LSU, you ought to say, man, we live in a wonderful life. Thanks to the modern university, and LSU in particular, we have experienced just that. Yet more is possible. Our collective challenge is to ensure that LSU endures as a symbol of truth-seeking, empathetic action, and courageous acts. All of us have been entrusted to avoid a dreaded obituary like the one in my favorite newspaper in the year 2050, Advocate, my favorite newspaper. I've learned to love it. In 2050, the Advocate offers the following obituary. Today we mourn the death of an old friend, LSU, who has been with us for many centuries. She was born in 1860 and was previously known as Louisiana State Seminary of Learning and Military Academy. She provided valuable contributions, a system of academic institutions, research contributions, economic development, healthcare, 64 ag centers in every parish of the state, national championships in many sports, including that guy Kelly. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, social workers, engineers, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, artists, and creative minds across every field and discipline. LSU lived by simple, sound financial principles, only spend what you generate, and reliable strategies of faculty governance and staff governance on occasion. Her health began to deteriorate rapidly when she lost sight of her core values, seeking truth, demonstrating empathy, operating with courage, and engaging collectively. Reports of well-intending leaders shutting down humanities departments, fine arts, and other academic units associated with perceived limited career options, a lack of empathy expressed in the form of limited philanthropic support, a failure to address the changing demographics, long-standing parallel play doomed her and only worsened her condition. The university lost ground when leaders promoted pet projects that lacked synergy, purpose, and collective engagement. Self-interest reigned. It took a beating when it could not defend its actions in this newspaper. She finally gave up the will to live when former students revolted because their experiences without humanistic preparation left them unable to learn on the job, relate to others, or read deeply. Many screamed, "You betrayed the line" in the LSU alma mater, motor of mankind, as they protested in the thousands. The university was preceded in death by her parents, learning and teaching, by her husband, truth, by her daughter, courage, by her son, empathy, by her niece, academic rigor, by her nephew, disciplined thinking. She is survived by 5 stepbrothers: Twitter, micro-credential, fake news, pseudoscience, and ahistorical thinking. No one attended her funeral, as Baton Rouge is a ghost town due to the recent pandemics, and the rest of the state thought it was fake news planted by a University of Alabama operative. My friends, LSU is a special place. 6 months of observation affirm that for me. However, we will only be as good as our collective engagement. And that's two ways. It's imperative for us to move beyond parallel play. Thank you.